I honestly think that no one who played in the PED era had his candidacy for the Hall of Fame overshadowed more than Fred McGriff. And let me try to explain why. Basically, for a decade and a half, he was exactly the same player. He had exactly the same season. He had exactly the same slash line. I could read the numbers for you, but the point is, you know what wasn't the same while this was going on? Everyone else was not the same. 15 years, starting in, I think this was 88. He was averaging 31 homers a year and barely under 400 on base, 900 OPS, and 100 RBIs. So the late 80s, PEDs had not really taken over the sport yet. So for the first 5 years that he was having these seasons, he was a home run champ 2 times, and he was almost the home run champ every year. It was all over the league leaderboard in all those categories we just talked about. And then in 1993, the world began to change. And so he started having, he was still having the same years, the same seasons, but all of a sudden, if you hit 35 or 36 or 37 or 41 homers, you weren't leading the league anymore. You had to hit 50. You had to hit 60. You had to hit 70. So if you were looking at the leaderboard in those years, you almost never found his name. But I think that kind of defines what it was like to be a clean player, especially a clean slugger in that time. All right, so now Fred McGriff's career is over. Those of us who vote in the Hall of Fame had the job of assessing his career, and we just missed. We missed on him. It's amazing that he never got 40% on any ballot when we were voting on him. But now he's got a new chance in front of a very different group. 2 guys who played with him, Greg Maddux and Chipper Jones, are on the committee, along with a bunch of players who played against him in his prime. And, I've served on these committees. I think Fred McGriff just fits the definition of the kind of players that they elect. So I honestly think that on Sunday night, Fred McGriff is getting in. So let me ask you about the other names on the ballot. I'm curious about, I'm curious who you would vote for if you were in the room. The other names: Bonds, Clemens, Rafael Palmeiro, that's the PED group. Your friend Curt Schilling, friend and former teammate, Albert Belle, Dale Murphy, and Don Mattingly, plus Fred McGriff. So, Doug, if we're going to assume that you're voting for Fred McGriff, you have 2 more slots on your ballot. Who are you taking from those names? Bonds, Clemens, Palmeiro, Schilling, Albert Belle, Dale Murphy, Don Mattingly.
Yes.
What do you think?
Well, this is why the voters, it's a very hard job.
Hard job.
And
It is.
it's really hard. And I mean, obviously I've said a number of times with the PED scenario, even though what's kind of unfair is I'm sure there's many people we don't know just because they didn't get caught. So, but if you did get caught, I gotta scratch you off. So that's easy for me.
Well, wait a second. So that's Rafael Palmeiro.
Did
Bonds and Clemens, quote unquote, get caught?
Okay, caught, indicted, whatever. And I mean, yes. And this is why it's a slippery slope. And I know since I've ranted about this a number of times, I'm going to spare the New Year's audience.
We're not going to go through all the details again, but you got to be careful how you phrase this.
Right. But I mean, that's true. I know I do. I mean, but yes, phrasing, investigated, all these things. It's definitely complicated. But so that's why for the rest of these guys, as you mentioned, that you kind of eliminated, they're all fantastic. And I don't know, like Curt Schilling was, it's definitely the best pitcher I played with, certainly from a day-to-day standpoint. And, just an outstanding pitcher, won the World Series a number of times. So I know that's a vote I would take if I had to go down to a few. I mean, Mattingly, now in terms of numbers, like Mattingly and Belle, I'm not down to the nitty gritty of their numbers. So I think the best thing I can do is kind of give the merits of the other cases. You know, I know, like, if you look at Dale Murphy, Murphy reminds me of Fred McGriff. You know,
Very
as a
much.
guy not associated, you know, PED kind of came before he was before the time. He played, he was steady, he was one of the best players. He stole bases, he was a defender, he did everything, but he was just at a time where the shift became just about one-dimensional home run hitters. And so that's how the back end of his career sort of clouded over all the great things he did. So for me, that's where on a principal level, yeah, Murphy was always, he got overshadowed. And although I don't think his numbers necessarily, I know the trophy, but, you know, compared to, say, Mattingly, batting average, all those things. So that's why I don't know if you have to pick two out of those four, if you're talking about Schilling, Belle, Murphy, Mattingly, I don't know. I can only just make the merits for all of them, which is why I think it's a really tough vote. And just to understand, they get to vote how many can get in. It's
Yeah,
75%.
well, when I was on the committee, and actually, as long as those committees existed, there were 16 people in the room, and you had 4 slots on your ballot. If you remember last year, the committee elected so many players that I think the reorganization of the committees is a reflection of that they don't really want the era committees electing that many players. So that's a long way of saying that they've gone from 4 slots on the ballot down to 3, and it's going to
3
make
slots.
it really challenging just mathematically for more than one player to get elected. When you start doing the math on how many total votes are in the room, 48 total votes.
Mhm.
For 2 to get elected, they'd have to eat up at least 24 of the 48 total votes. It's going to be really challenging for more
Yeah.
than one to get elected. But it just, to me, it's going to be fascinating to see how this turns out. I've been on committees that looked at Dale Murphy and Don Mattingly, and if I remember right, neither of them got enough votes where they announced the total. My sense is that was because the players in the room felt their peaks were too short. But I mean, both of those guys were in the best player in baseball conversation for a period of time. And
Mhm.
there's a lot to be said for having a best player in baseball peak. So you never know how one group of people will look at them versus another. And it's going to be really fascinating to see how a totally different collection of voters looks at Bonds and Clemens.
Yeah.
Um, I find it hard to believe that this group will look at them in a way where they're willing to overlook stuff and elect them. I don't know. Curt Schilling is the kind of player I could see getting elected. Outside of Theo, I don't think he's got a direct connection to anyone in the room. I don't know. It just, who's in the room makes a big difference when they come to vote. All I know is very excited to see what happens. The announcement is 8 p.m. Eastern time, Sunday, 5 p.m. San Diego time. It'll be on MLB Network. I can't wait.